a life lived in fear is a life half lived. And it's not scripture, but that little phrase has kind of been useful to me at certain moments in my life, and to sort of think, if I can just realize that fear is the thing that's keeping me, not even like this abstract fear, that shouldn't be the deal breaker. There are 15 other things I ought to be doing as a good teacher, but let's try to make sure I at least do these 3 things, and then save that for another day. And that other day may come or it may not come. In Thailand, they have a really strong sense of national identity. Like, I found that there was a lot more promotion of Thai language, Thai culture.
Welcome to the That Guy in Cambodia podcast. Today's episode, I'm interviewing Eric, who's a teacher at Hope International School, a school that specializes in reaching missionary kids and supporting missionary families with education. If you're interested in applying, take a look at the website link down below. And if you're interested in any sort of opportunity to serve on the mission field, check out opportunities.omf.org. Enjoy. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So happy to have you. Tell me, you're a teacher here in Cambodia. How long have you been here? What brought you here?
We've been here since 2009. Yeah, it's a while, but we've been in Southeast Asia since 2000. So the first 8 years, but 6 of those in Thailand, 2 of those doing a master's degree at a school there called Grace International School in Chiang Mai.
Cool.
And at the time we left for the field, Hope, where I work now, wasn't even a thing. So it was kind of like, if I'm a teacher and I'm going to Southeast Asia, looks like that was the new thing on the block. So we had a really good experience there. And so it was a tough decision to come to Cambodia, but it was really through a couple experiences we had there. One of them, even meeting a family in Cambodia who was sending their kid to dorm, their 7th grader to dorm in Chiang Mai, and kind of put Cambodia a little bit more on the radar. And then meeting some of our colleagues who were working here and seeing that, we began to realize outside of our little bubble in Chiang Mai, there are a lot of people living in kind of remote places struggling with education.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of almost a second call.
Yeah.
One was to kind of get us out of the States and out to the field. But then when we were on the field, a lot of times, it's not that it wasn't what we thought it was. It was what we thought it was. It just wasn't complete. Like, the picture wasn't complete.
Yeah.
You see, in our heads, we had this mantra, we're keeping missionaries on the field through education, which is absolutely true. But the other thing is, if you have only one school or only a few schools and only one place, there's a lot of places that remain sort of untouched or unreached, at least for families. And a lot of people have families, and a lot of them have kids.
Yep.
So that's whether or not education, we could talk all day about whether we put too big of an emphasis on education or whether education needs to look like a school, something like that. But for a lot of people, if there isn't a school, they either won't go there or they won't stay there.
Right. So it seems like the school, a lot of families will flock to that school area. I mean, we saw that from southern Phnom Penh as it moved to northern Phnom Penh.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And that's an old story. And it's when I actually happened to be on the board at the school when we were looking at moving the school. And there was a lot of hand wringing about, is this going to kill the school? And that sort of thing. But the community the school is just a magnet, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
It's
for the families.
A lot of them did the drive for a while, but after...
No, they just moved. It's way easier.
Yeah.
That was an hour away almost. Especially in traffic.
So now it is what it is. This is the new center of the community, but it is a new center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. So why Cambodia? You just kind of felt you needed to help branch out of that Chiang Mai bubble?
Every migration's a push and pull, right?
Yeah.
We needed God to know that God was in it.
Yeah.
We did. It wasn't clear. When we left Chiang Mai, I didn't know for sure. We went back for a furlough. I didn't know for sure that I wouldn't be going back there. But I felt like it may be, just in lots of little ways, I felt like maybe God was moving us on. But there was another school just starting up in Chiang Rai, which is about 3 hours away from Chiang Mai. Another option was to go back to Grace, where we were. The third option was Cambodia. And I had visited, my wife had visited as part of her role, maybe I want to say about 2006 or 2007, when Hope was a baby school. It was maybe 4 or 5 years old. It was just a couple kids, mostly young, just a handful of high schoolers and a couple rental properties. She met the director, Brent Wilsmore, and she met some of the kids there. And it was really a lot of kids who had it was kind of a mutt school. These kids had come from everywhere. Some of them had been homeschooling and it wasn't working anymore. Some of them had been, like, there was a kid, I think he was, as a 12-year-old, he was in Chinese kindergarten. And it had been kind of a traumatic experience for him because not only was he the oldest kid by far in the class, but he actually wasn't that good, like with Chinese language.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was constantly getting scolded. She met Brent, the director, and she met some of these kids and she said, well, what do you think of this school? They said, this is like heaven. And it was just such a disconnect because if you could see the school physically at that time, you go, this is a disappointing heaven. It was not an awesome facility by any means. But the culture was kind of special. The community was kind of special.
You just had a few families. The kids all knew each other.
Kids knew each other. It was really a home base. Like for a lot of moms and stuff like that, they would come after school, and the kids wanted to show up as soon as they could. They wanted to stay as long as they could because it was the only strip of grass around. It was the only play equipment. Not awesome, any of it. And also it did give a point of intersection because in those days, and it's still this way in some ways, Phnom Penh, you live behind bars.
Isn't it interesting, huh?
Yeah, you live behind gates at 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night. Everybody is, the markets were closed. You shut your gate, you lock it because of crime. And so the existence of our kids and the existence of the families was really kind of behind bars, behind walls. Every window is barred. And so this was a place that not just kids could come, but the moms could come and meet other parents. And so it was really a community center.
Yeah. So can you kind of describe Phnom Penh? Because I'm thinking for people who are listening, they're thinking Phnom Penh is what we see today with the malls and everything. And you're talking about a time quite a ways back where there's much less infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think, it was. Like when we first arrived, we're talking about the tallest building you'd see. The average building height would be 3 to 4 stories.
Yeah, wow. So kind of like Siem Reap today.
Yeah, a lot like that. And, there was the odd building that was taller, but not many, and not probably over 20, 30 stories.
Yeah.
The markets and the restaurants, most all of those were closed by 5 or 6.
Wow.
At dark, sundown. People are in their pajamas. In fact, if we go over to our landlord's house after 6 o'clock, they might not answer the door. They would certainly be in their pajamas if we had a question or to pay rent. And so, if you went out after that, especially where we were in the city, there were never any police. And so you were not taking your life into your hands, but
anything could happen.
It would not be unusual for your bag to be snatched or your motorbike to go missing.
Usually not violent crime.
No.
Yeah.
No, very much snatch and grab.
Yeah. And that's kind of why there's the bars and the gates. It's kind of deter that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And even local Khmer experienced that. It's just all over.
There was violent crime, but it wasn't something that we would directly experience. It was more that we'd heard about it, and it would be like usually over money. Somebody owed somebody money. And, Yeah. So this took me maybe a week or two of being in here to realize this is more than education. This is, for a lot of our students, that Hope School was the best thing about Cambodia. And for some of those, really the only positive. Nothing against Cambodia, nothing against Phnom Penh, but it's not a place that's a paradise for kids. Not a lot of parks, not a lot of recreational options.
Not a lot of trees around.
Libraries, you name it, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of the school or just their room at home.
Right.
Yeah, so she came to visit and she came back to me and said, I think you should go check it out. So about a year later, a friend and I went, and that's a whole story in itself, but a friend and I went for just a couple days. We just had a small window in the midst of teaching and showed up and took a little tour around the school, met the director, kind of sat down and normally it was a little bit like a reverse interview. I think I was kind of interviewing him because I wanted to sort of, before I even thought about coming here, what is this guy all about? What is this school all about?
Right.
And he said, I remember a couple things from that conversation. And he said, after I asked him a bunch of questions, he just said, Eric, he said, we're here for the gospel. And something about that, you could interpret that a few different ways. But I think what I understood him to say is that, you know what? Hope School is a little piece of a much bigger picture. Hope School is not about Phnom Penh. It's not about just education. It means that it is a kind of a strategic piece for the gospel in Cambodia. And he had felt a call even before he was married. And he told his wife going in, I think God's called me to Cambodia. And he didn't know when he arrived, none of us did, really what we were getting ourselves into. Because I've come to believe God will allow us to believe just about anything to get us where he wants us, right? And then we start to see why we're really there.
Yeah, we just can't comprehend it, right?
Yeah. All the things I told our churches and friends and family about what we were going to do, I laugh at some of those things now.
Like what? Like what?
Well, we talk about it in very simplistic terms about we're going to, and all of the things I said, I don't think were untrue.
Right.
To keep families on the field and to...
It's so much bigger, like you said.
It's bigger and it's smaller. I honestly think if a lot of people knew, if I went into great detail about what my days are like, they would be rather disappointed.
Well, I mean? Ordinary missionary life, right?
Right. They think they would like us to know that I rode an ox to school and that it was some village school made of, that we built ourselves out of mud and thatch roof and that kind of stuff. And I
we
think
can arrange that.
Yeah. So, and the truth is, as much as I love teaching, you can only talk so much about what a teacher does in the day before people's eyes will probably glaze over, right? You know, like, do they really want to hear about me marking papers and prepping lessons and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to talk about the work that's going on across Cambodia. Some really exciting things happening with when we see the gospel go forth and lives transformed and that kind of stuff. And all of that's real and all that's happening. Just my little part in it seems rather mundane.
No, I get what you mean because, I mean, working at Hope School and working as a teacher, that is, you're just doing all this stuff, right? But it's the relationships you're building with the kids and they're still in the field. And
I mean, but honestly, 80-90% of it is what teachers would do anywhere, right?
Right. I totally agree with that. Well, I think that's helpful for people listening because if they were curious or think, going to Cambodia would be so difficult, especially nowadays, it's like, no, and there's lots of great opportunities. But I mean, I don't know, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say, okay, if teaching is your thing, if you really care about teaching and learning, there's not many places I've ever been that are a better situation than this. We're able to more or less get on with what we want to do and focus on teaching and learning.
Students are super studious.
Without a lot of extra layers. We've got kids that more or less want to learn and want to be in school. They like school. So if you talk about my experience of the 9 to 5 or the 7:15 to 2:45 or whatever, it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
Step outside of school and it sometimes can be complicated.
Yes. That's a good point.
You know, and it's depending on your neighborhood, depending on your income level and even sense of adventure, it can be more or less complicated, right? There are places I could live that would be more complicated and less complicated work that I could do outside of that. I take a motorbike to school, but there's more comfortable ways to do it. I don't mind a little adventure sometimes, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I definitely, I really don't want to give up the motorbike yet.
No. Well, for me, it's cheaper and it's quicker too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The traffic. Oh my gosh. Like why would I spend an hour more in it? No.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I understood that by going as a teacher, I understood that I think this part I can do and this part I understand and probably isn't going to be radically different. And I think that's been true. Mm-hmm. And I think the differences have been almost all good ones. It's been more gain than loss as far as what I would have as a teacher. Few less resources. Certainly the salary is lower.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things that I'm happy to not have to worry about.
Yeah. How about like the calling? Because that's kind of a common thing. I mean, you've been on the field for long enough that this is something significant. You've kind of hit this kind of normalcy. There is obviously something pretty major that got you to this point, and there's something that's keeping you here more than just what you're used to.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I don't say it has to be, but
I think there has to be, because I see a lot of people either burn out or take some wild tailspins. So unless you're grounded or...
yeah, I think honestly, being part of a structured environment like the school has been healthy, because some missionaries work in a lot of isolation. And I think what we all learned with COVID is isolation can do weird things to people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very fact that I'm part of a structure, people know if I show up or I don't. If you're really not doing well, you can only hide that so long, right?
Yeah.
In a school environment, going to show up somewhere. So I think that for long-term health, to be part of something like that, a structured environment, has been good. But I mean, going back to, did I ever think I was going to be doing this as a kid? No, no, it wasn't even on my radar anywhere. Probably not even teaching, although my parents are both teachers. So, I mean, I've got a little bit of Calvinistic background, the whole predestination thing and something like that. So I feel like in some ways, it wasn't like the skies opened and I knew I was going to teach. It was more like I just kind of accepted my lot. I accepted what...
your destiny.
Yeah, my destiny. So eventually I just kind of gave up and said, okay, yeah, I think this is what I have to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And for the most part, that I haven't regretted that.
Yeah.
No, I haven't regretted it.
For the most part.
I mean, there are lots of days when I sort of think I could be doing something else. You know, like you sort of
like every
when you
teacher.
see that when you see other people that look a lot more relaxed than you do, or you know, are done.
Yeah.
You know,
Done with work.
Yeah, having leisurely breakfast at home when I'm on my way to school or something.
Yeah.
But those moments pass.
I think that you've got a lot of layers here, right? Because there's the missionary component, there's the teaching component, cultural, you know, all this type of stuff. So, I mean, just in general, teaching life is pretty hectic and wild. And there's a lot of emotional toll. Like when I stepped out of teaching to do mission work, it was the strangest thing, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have the most emotional energy that I've had in like so long. Like, I think I'm ready for a family now. Like, I couldn't even comprehend that before.
As a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a guy come in to talk to our education classes. It's funny the stuff you remember and don't remember from your education classes. But he said before he got into teaching, he had a life as a builder, and he would spend like 10 hours a day on a job site doing physical work, and he would come home and take a shower and he was ready to go. He could go out for the night, stuff like that. He said as a teacher, you know, he'd spend all day in school teaching, he'd come home and he was done for that was it. So it wasn't the physical work, it's something else. Yeah, I understand. I think because there's not too many points in the day where you're able to just sort of be recharged.
Yeah, and put it on casual, put it on cruise.
Yeah.
Like you're on all the time.
Yeah. You got to keep it together.
Yeah.
Right? As a teacher, you keep the emotions in check, that kind of stuff. So
totally.
You've got vulnerable people that you're working with.
How do you balance it out? Because I feel like I've been really impressed. I mean, you told me how many preps you had, and I was like, oh my gosh, how do you prep that many different courses? That's just overwhelming for me. And you've stuck with the school for so long. Yeah. So I'm curious if you've got some tips, you know, that you could give teachers that help pace yourself.
I wish I could. Yeah, sometimes if I look back at some seasons I've had as a teacher, I look at it almost like that was not me. It was like, almost an out of body experience. Like, that's crazy.
How did I even put up with that?
Yeah. And I guess the short answer is, God must have helped me. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't know. I think you do have to, every lesson you have to do this every day. You have to constantly do these. And that's part of the tiring part, recalibrate your expectations, right? You sort of say, all right,
pivoting.
So this isn't going to work. And this is going to take longer than I have. So you're just doing that on a micro and a macro level and trying to think, all right, what really is job one here? What's job one and job two? And I know that there are 15 other things I ought to be doing as a good teacher, but let's try to make sure I at least do these 3 things. And then save that for another day, and that other day may come or it may not come.
Yeah. And you're just okay with it. And
you have
I think
to be.
You have to. Yes. Yeah. Otherwise you drive yourself crazy, or you push yourself to an all new psychological edge.
Well, I think I was told this before we ever came onto the field. We did have the advantage of doing a little bit of pre-field training. And the people who are doing this said that the old model of missions, and this is a little bit of a too broad strokes.
Yeah.
They said the old model is kind of like the mission station model, where you go to sort of the mission field and you try to recreate what you've left. You build the houses like you had back in, you build the church and the building, and it's got to look, architecturally, it's got to look a certain style, and you've got to wear a certain clothes, and you've got to do this. So it's kind of like this foreign thing that's been brought in this foreign construct. And those situations were probably a little bit more comfortable for the missionaries, but they weren't necessarily that fruitful because they were completely culturally irrelevant.
Exactly.
Right? So the reaction to that was incarnational, right? Which is where we're going to go and we're going to eat everything that do and live like they do and that kind of stuff. And so some of those, you feels like they were maybe more fruitful or more engaged, but the missionaries often paid a heavy, heavy price.
More burnout, right?
Yeah. And so when we came into Cambodia, I think that almost everybody we met was probably that style of more incarnational missionaries, where they lived in the communities, ate, and partly because there almost wasn't another option.
Yeah.
Like there really wasn't a safe, comfortable way to do it.
Right. Now you have that, but especially then there wasn't.
Yeah. So a lot of those families, I think they were traumatized because things happened to them or to their kids or whatever that they just didn't see coming, couldn't protect them from. And some of them paid a really heavy price. So what we were advised to do is to sort of find a middle way.
I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to share, but like what?
Well, one of them, it's not really my story to tell, but a case where there was a woman who went into labor, and sort of the husband, even though he had medical training, and I'll probably get part of the story wrong, but he sort of, I think she might have gone into labor early or something like that, but went out to try to get some help. And so the women in the neighborhood sort of came in to try to help his wife, and in doing so kind of shoved him out of the way. And he fell backwards and hit his head and was knocked out.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't remember so he was unavailable as she was in great distress. And they might have, and again, they might have even lost the baby in this case, but kind of like the nightmare scenario of everything went as bad as it could have gone.
Yeah.
And so what you sort of think is that the situation that they were in, the kind of, I don't want to say set it up for that, but it was, that was the price, and we lived in some pretty rough neighborhoods when we first moved in, and we were broken into a couple times, and our kids took all of us quite a while to kind of be able to sleep peacefully through the whole night whenever we'd hear something.
Yep. My wife Lekina has the same experience.
I think everybody who was alive in Cambodia in the 80s and 90s has lots of experiences, right? Yeah. Especially in Phnom Penh, but probably anywhere. Yeah. So they said, they advised us to sort of find a middle way between those two.
That's good.
So sometimes we eat local food and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we keep a schedule that's more like, our neighbors, and sometimes not. And I do think that's helped for longevity. And probably even for a school to do that, if that's possible, to try to find we don't have to necessarily do everything the same way a school, you just have to adapt somewhere, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's actually really good if you could speak to that, because I think both in the family context, and then we can chat about the school context too, but in the family context, what have been some of those things that you can do besides eating Western food that can just bring your family back to that, okay, we can do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can go back to Thailand when we had our son. We were a year in the field and we had our son, and we tried to do what you're supposed to do as parents, which is after they're a couple weeks old, you put them in a room by themselves, or maybe a couple months old, right? And let them
cry it out for sleep training.
Cry it out, right? Sleep training, right? That's just all the books told you to do that and that kind of stuff. And then we realized that our neighbors thought that we were monsters.
Yeah.
That was just about the worst thing you could do to a child.
It was like child torture.
Child torture, yeah.
It's like child abuse.
And so then that caused us to think a little bit about, why do we do that? And I think the conclusion we came to was that the reason that you do that is because you want to teach your kid to be independent of you, right? From an early age.
Yeah.
And so,
or mom and dad actually can go to sleep on time or don't have to.
Yeah, it also makes sense. But we realized that even though there was probably an upside to that, there was probably a downside to that too. Mm-hmm. So we found sort of a middle way, right? We didn't necessarily have him in bed with us the whole night, but we bought as big a laundry basket as we could and stuck some pillows in it and put him in there and had him on the floor, next to us. And it was an advantage in some ways because it meant that, if he needed us in the night, then it wasn't a trek down the hallway.
Yeah.
We only had to use one air conditioner instead of two. So as somebody who likes to save money, that was an advantage. And what looks like he's in university now. He's been able to survive a few years without us.
There we go.
But I think also we've noticed too that we don't necessarily have to put the guilt trip on him to sort of feel like he should come around for holidays or be around. There is an attachment there. And same thing when my wife's parents came and they moved to Cambodia for half of the year about 10 years ago. And they lived separately from us for a couple of years. And then we realized that all of our neighbors thought something was wrong.
Really?
Right? So your parents are here and you don't live with them.
Yeah.
Then we started to think about that and think about, okay, is there a way that we can find... we don't really do that in the States, live right in the same house with...
Yeah, but you know what's interesting? I just heard something recently that supposedly that started changing around the 1950s. They used to have kind of where the family would have a home and then you'd build a house on your property for your kids.
Yeah, it sounds almost biblical.
Exactly, right? And then that people do that here in Cambodia all the time. It's so fascinating. But you're right, like living with that, at least in my day in the States, is a pretty foreign concept.
Oh, it was, yeah, because we had to think a little bit about how to do this, but we did end up getting a slightly bigger house than we would have otherwise, and we just took the top floor and they had sort of we split the middle floor and kind of shared the bottom floor.
That's so cool you did that.
Yeah, and there were a couple bumps, a couple hassles, but on the whole, my kids got to see a lot of their grandparents, which is not a given when you leave. We do get a lot of quality time with them, which is an upside. So we're not around for every birthday and holiday, but when we're there. We see a lot of them, intentional time. Yeah, but I know around the school, around our foreign friends, it was like, so you live with your parents. So how's that going, right?
I know, isn't that funny? Because that is such a contrast between the culture. I'm curious to hear what your insight is, because I know for me, living in Cambodia has changed my view of how I want to be able to be with my parents as they age. I want my kids to be spending a lot of time with them. It's a little hard being abroad, and so I have to look at what that looks like. But I love that idea of family being together, because when I see elderly in Khmer culture, I saw it in Filipino culture as well, grandma and grandpa were always around.
Yeah.
Even if they were just sitting there, they were always around. And they seemed so healthy, lively, and like they enjoyed it. And now when I call my grandma, even if it's like once a week or every other week, that's like the happiest thing for her. Yeah. And I think that's really sad that our culture has said that's a normal. Like that's really scary.
It is really, every now and then we'll visit, when we're back home, we'll visit some friends, and there's a lot of widows. And a lot of them are spending every day, all day alone in the house.
Yeah.
They'll have sort of social things. And I think, there's just an assumption that it has to work that way. Either you're in your own house for as long as you can, or you go to a home, but there's no other option.
Right.
And that a lot of them love their kids, but they even think that I wouldn't want to impose. Right. I want to be independent. And so something about that says, all right, that feels to me, that's maybe kind of almost a national stronghold, right? That we like that. To be independent is not necessarily wrong in and of itself, but there's a point at which, everybody pays a price for that.
Yeah, well, it's the whole individualistic versus communal mindset. There's pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
We see governments that are built on each one of them and their flaws. But I think that there's definitely, when I compare Western to Eastern culture, it's like, man, we're definitely missing the family component for the health at the expense of like the emotional health of like everyone involved. But I do think like, I mean, I understand the issue is usually this idea of, well, whose house is it? Am I living with my parents or are my parents living with me? And the way that goes, who has the kitchen? You know, there's all these things.
Yeah, the kitchen is the flashpoint.
I think so. So you just have two kitchens.
No, you joke, but I think that probably,
I think it's right.
Probably, I think two kitchens is the way to make it practical for a lot of people.
And that's the idea is you can make it work. Like it depends on what's the assumption. It can't work or it can.
Yeah, because it really is the center of the home in a lot of ways. And that's where a lot of you can sort of operate in your own space, but you can't avoid the kitchen. Yeah, it's where the styles. Anyway, so there's a number of ways, and probably a lot of the ways I'm not even aware of how living here has kind of subtly changed our mindset, because it doesn't usually happen overnight. It happens in small ways, but you do learn to sort of, they say you don't really see your own country until you leave it. And I think that's, so now I have all these thoughts about America and what it means to be an American that I would never have if I hadn't left.
Same.
Yeah.
It's such a strange thing because it's impossible to explain it.
Yeah, I want to say it's like objective. Of course, I'm not objective, but there is a level of objectivity that you get maybe stepping outside of it and coming back in. And yeah.
I mean, what would you say like are your favorite things about Khmer culture and then favorite things about American culture now that you've been away from it? And you could say Southeast Asian culture in general.
Khmer culture is one of the things that was surprising is how different for countries that are neighbors, how different Thai culture to Khmer culture is.
Biggest contrast would be what?
I think in Thailand, people are they're the only country in Southeast Asia that wasn't colonized. What I realize is that there's a lot of pride they have in that, but also it's changed. I think there's good and bad parts about that, but in Thailand, they really have a really strong sense of national identity. Like I found that there was a lot more sort of promotion of Thai language, Thai culture. In Cambodia, I feel like probably the 1970s broke a lot of things. The war years broke a lot of things. And so just from like a ministry standpoint, for instance, in Thailand, it felt like you would have to sort of invest this much energy to sort of get a little bit of fruit or growth. And Cambodia, sometimes it feels like that's flipped around.
Interesting.
Like, that I think that most of the people I've talked to when they talk about what's the best thing about Cambodia, I think 90% of the time people say it's the people.
Yeah, I would say that too.
Right?
It's amazing.
And so I think you just feel like here, if you invest a little bit of time and attention and emotional energy, you oftentimes do see fruit from it. And sometimes more than you'd ever expect. It doesn't always, it's not a guarantee, but a lot of times you find a little bit goes a long way.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's exciting because at the end of the day, we all want to see fruit and we all want to see that our time here has made a difference. And so I do think, like going back to the school, I think our students are going to go on to do some exciting things. And I think that God is doing things in us by being here. But sometimes I think it's probably our Cambodian coworkers and staff that will have the biggest impact certainly on Cambodia, because long after we're gone, they're going to be here and they're going to be running schools and churches and families.
Yeah.
And so that's something I feel like we probably don't emphasize quite enough in the school is really intentionally investing. A lot of people do, but intentionally investing in some of the Cambodian staff.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite way on my first school of like learning Khmer. It's getting to know the Khmer staff. And I still have those relationships. All the other coworkers, almost all of them have moved on.
Yeah.
But it's just so, and like you said, I think it's the people and there's something just really magical. I think about just like a down to earth, me, I really want to see what rice farming's like. Oh, come to my house. You know, it's just, I love that. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. And so, for example, a story, we had a guy he was hired. I think Brent, one of the things that Brent was, I think he was very wise in a lot of ways, but he was kind of a simple guy and just like he had certain things that he just was steadfast about, certain these kind of core principles that he would just kind of, and a lot of them were not ones that would be sort of, sometimes I say like sexy educationally, right? Not the latest and greatest, but just kind of these core principles about one of the things about the school that he wanted everybody to be together, right? So arranging the day, arranging the timetable so that we could be together at breaks, together at lunch, whole school assemblies together. So there was a strong togetherness thing. And, he was a family man with 5 kids. And so nothing made him happier than kind of when everybody was together.
And Khmer staff and foreign staff together.
Just we are kind of like this idea that the first day we get together for orientation, there's no business. It's just, we share stories. We talk about how God brought us to this place.
Wow.
And so these little things, morning devotions, we just come, he wasn't prescriptive about what they needed to look like, about the content. It was almost for him just about, we come together, we share a devotion and we pray. And so, I began to realize that one of the things he did is he kind of just put these points of contact into the DNA of the school.
Right.
And that the strength of the community is forged on those points of contact, that togetherness. Yeah. But another thing he did was he would, what do you call, character hires. He kind of assumed that we were probably never going to find the ideal person for the job because just lack of educational opportunities, whatever. Sometimes it's a Christian school, so you need somebody who's a believer. There might be somebody else who looks like they're more skilled. So he tried to find the right person, then find a place for them, right? And that place may or may not really be an exact match. You find somebody and, all right, we don't have a position as a teaching assistant, but would you be willing to be a guard? So hires them, they're a guard, a teaching position opens up, or a teaching assistant, they become a teaching assistant. So we had a guy who was working as a kind of a resource support person. And I just felt so bad for this guy. He had some of the most difficult kids to work with, ones who were obstinate, didn't want to learn, didn't really treat him with a lot of respect, but he kind of persevered in that. Then we took him to a school camp. We went to Battambang, and we tended to take 1 or 2 Khmer staff because most of us are hopeless at Khmer, and we needed a translator or liaison. So he went along on our school camp. I didn't ask a lot, of him, but I said, we just need to liaise with the hotel and we need this and this. And I kept finding that not only had he done everything I asked him to do, he sort of anticipated the next step and the next step and the next step. And so I started to think, I think this guy has some real administrative or organizational gifts. And so at the end of the year, he was a kind of a middle school TA.
Right.
And I never really figured out what to do with this guy. I'd never had a TA before. I felt so sorry for him because I was kind of useless for using him as a TA. But I did say to my principal, I said, you know what? I think we're underusing him. I think he's got skills that we're not developing. So within a year, the head office position, like the administrative assistant position, came open. I think he was asked to apply, or he applied for it. He did it. He did a brilliant job with it for about 6-7 years. And now he's the number 2 guy working for AIS Insurance, which is like got hundreds of people.
Is that AIA? The big red one?
Maybe AIA, yeah.
Yeah.
Insurance
That's
company.
awesome.
So he is like the kind of the right-hand man of the manager. So hosting international conferences, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, he was doing sort of learning support. And that's really exciting to be able to see. We lost a really good guy, at the school, but at the same time, I feel like, he could only fly so high in our little school, right?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So how do you think Hope can continue that culture? Because when I came, I think my big thing was how just friendly everyone was.
Yeah.
And then we're so thankful you're here.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
I've never been in a work environment that I've got that much positive feedback. Cause 1 or 2 is like, okay, those are enthusiastic people. And, but then, wow, there's a lot of people there is a community there. And even having,
It feels weird, doesn't it?
it does.
Like to have students say, thank you for teaching us at the end of the lesson. I mean, I'm a little more used to it now, but I'll probably never get fully used to it. I'm kind of like, what's your deal? But I realize for a lot of them, it's just their habit.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's a great habit to have. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I love that culture that I think is there at Hope, and especially because it has some really core people such as yourself who've been there for so long and been able to keep that culture, and the hiring, keeping that culture there. So how do you continue that? Because I also see, as it's big, I see it also trying to experiment with policies and all of this structural stuff that it kind of almost feels like, oh, we're kind of getting a little bit farther from that picture you talked to me about.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? About how to manage change and how to keep a core culture when you get big.
Yeah.
You know, churches struggle with that. Every organization does. So we're going to lose some stuff along the way.
Right.
And I don't have the answer to that, but I think probably culture is going to have to be built more in sort of cells than as school-wide, like as within the smaller schools. That'd be one thing. Yeah, I know what you mean about so happy that you're here and can we do anything to support you? I think some of that is a reflection of what I hope is a Christian ethos at the school.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it should be. Some of it is probably a reflection of the people that work there. But I think some of it is actually, and we've noticed this too, like our team, we operate as part of a 5-country region.
Yeah.
And our team is probably seen as, maybe not the model team, but like as maybe the closest, most interactive. We're seen as, when people come from outside, when they say, we want what you guys have. Mm-hmm. But I think what they don't see is the intentionality that goes into that. But I would also say, we have people coming in from Thailand who say, wow, we'd like to be like you guys. And I just kind of want to say, I don't think it's going to work. Because first of all, the size of your team, where you're a lot bigger than we are, but also you don't get that without adversity. And I think...
And like going through adversity together.
Going through adversity together. It's like the whole Band of Brothers thing,
I think
right?
it is. Especially for men, they've said psychologically, that's what bonds men is problem solving.
Yeah. But I think the fact that we're all sort of strangers in a strange land, okay, bonds us together more than we would otherwise. So there's that it emphasizes the things we have in common, the fact that we're outsiders. So there's that. But I think also just the difficulty, there's not a year that has gone by where somebody didn't get seriously ill or injured or tragedy didn't happen, not even a semester that goes by. And those are the kind of things that it's sink or swim, where the school has to come around you.
Right. You can't be independent.
Because we don't have excess, as you know. We don't have lots of people to throw at this thing. We need to, it's the same thing as an organization. We're doing a difficult job. We're doing a job that requires some very specific skills. We really can't afford to lose people.
Yeah.
With that amount of language learning and institutional knowledge and learning, so we've got to fight for them, and we've got to be able to keep them if we can. Mm-hmm. And so I think without that kind of need to keep people, but also without maybe that shared adversity, I don't know if you get a strength of community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So not to say bring on the persecution or something like that.
There's plenty already out there. We're never going to have to ask for more. I mean, well, to counteract that, I chat with some of my friends in the States, and we talk about how it's pretty comfy. There's sometimes not a lot of adversity. So we have to make up adversity. You know, we make it up politically or whatever. And there's also some psychology, like some psychological experiments that they had, or data showing that people who don't have anything going wrong in their life, they like create issues and problems.
Oh, I'm a firm believer. I'm a firm believer. Oh, yes.
Well, teaching teenagers, you know.
Yeah. Well, you meet people in the States, and yeah, it's the same thing with risk-taking behavior. You know, if you've got a kid whose environment is too safe and too stable, they're going to skateboard, they're going to free solo climb. I think there's some level of drama that we're wired for. The good news for me is living in the developing world in a city like this that's kind of unpredictable, that the drama box is ticked. Right? You know what I mean?
Totally.
I don't need more drama in my life.
Your motto on the way to work.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I love it.
Something's going to happen.
It's like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Like I think about that. People pay how much to go into a theme park? And I get that every time I hop on my motor.
I know.
Right?
I think a lot of us long-termers here might be secret adrenaline junkies.
There's
people who come here and they have a difficult experience and they go away and they end up coming back because there's something. It's just the same thing with combat. There's guys who have done numerous, like they go to Iraq or something like that,
Yeah.
and they leave, and they feel somehow just that
They can't do domestic life.
they can't do domestic life, and so they go back and work as in security or something, and put themselves in the line of fire.
Yeah, we're wired for it.
So I do think, God has wired us for a certain level of adversity or fight, and if we don't have real things to fight, we'll make up stuff to fight. I think you're right.
So I guess if people are listening and they're interested in helping out with mission efforts, I wonder, I'll put the links down in the description that they can kind of check out the openings at Hope School. But I wonder what you could say to them if they're wondering, should I? Maybe they're teaching a comfy school job or a busy school, whatever school they're at. And they're wondering, do I feel called? What would you say to them?
The call is important because at some point you're going to have those moments where if God is not in this at all, where you sort of say, what was I thinking? I think we have had people come over because it just seems like a good thing to do. It seems like a good cause. And they've come over and they've done some really good work and they've had a good experience, but they don't stay. Mm-hmm. So I think now we have had other people who come over to say, I think I can do 2 years. And they get over here and they find out that, actually, I'm kind of enjoying this. And my kids are really happy here.
Yeah.
And so they do stay longer. But to really go to sort of run a full race, I think the call does matter.
What would you tell them? Yeah. To test that call or to know?
Yeah. I think God can confirm in a number of different ways. But I would say, I think there are people out there that are called and they don't go because of fear. And I think fear is the great enemy. And a lot of times what I found is that, and I've had a couple moments in my life about this where I felt compelled or called to do something. And I had this real uncertainty and ambivalence about it. And when I've been able to think about it and isolate it, I would oftentimes realize that fear was in the way. But it wasn't fear of what I knew would happen. It's fear of what I thought might happen. So it was hypothetical fear. It was kind of a nebulous fear.
Yeah.
So when I've been able to sort of name the fear, right, it loses its power. And so to be able to to say almost to the fear, all right, I see you, I get it, but that's not good enough. Because there was lots of things to fear. There was nothing that in coming to Cambodia, we knew a lot of people here and everybody here had difficult things happen. They had gotten sick, they'd been broken into. And so I don't feel like my fears were unfounded.
Right.
And the truth is, all of those things have happened to us, but somehow they happen everywhere. There's no safe place, really, except, the center of God's will, right? So I would say, don't let fear be the thing that keeps you from doing this. And because, going back to, it's a little bit of a silly movie, but I think it's kind of profound in some ways too, is Baz Luhrmann's first feature, Strictly Ballroom. I don't know if you've seen this. I know. It's fun, it's worth a watch, but the recurring theme in there, it's about a guy who basically, he's a ballroom dancer and he's really good, but he doesn't want to do the thing that will win him the prize. He doesn't want to just do all the usual steps. He wants to do something different or new. And so the mantra that comes through there is, a life lived in fear is a life half lived. And it's not scripture, but that little phrase has kind of been useful to me at certain moments in my life, and to sort of think, if I can just realize that fear is the thing that's keeping me, not even like this abstract fear, that shouldn't be the deal breaker. Yeah. Something else might be, but not that.
That's good.
Not fear.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of Satan's big tactics.
Absolutely.
It's like he can't actually do things to stop us, but he can get us things like doubt, or maybe there must be a barrier, or what if?
Yep. It just messes with their minds.
Right.
Yeah. Because there is a huge upside to living this, we've sacrificed things, but I feel like we have gained way more than we've lost.
And where have you felt that gain? Like, I feel you, and I just feel there's something deep. Yeah,
that's one. There's one of the famous passages from Jesus when he talks about no one who leaves father and mother and brothers and sisters for my sake will fail to gain. And then it says 100-fold, and then he says in this life and the next. So I realized
Wow.
I had never really reckoned with that one, because I think that in my mind, I wanted it to say, I thought it said in the next life,
Yeah.
the treasures in heaven thing. But it doesn't just say that, it says in this life. So I haven't counted, but we've had lots of houses, lots of vehicles, lots of friendships, lots of aunties and uncles, we've left a limited number of those things. And through all the things we've been through, God has continued to expand so it really is the abundant life. I feel like just the day to day, we've been in and not for trying to, I've been in lots of, I've said this to my friend, because every once in a while we'll go and we'll just talk about our lives here, and he'll just go, man, he goes, you guys have the craziest life, or you have the most, and I just said to him, I said, you know what? I said, I really am trying to have a boring life. I'm just terrible at it. You know what I mean? I'm not seeking this out, but at the same time, if I look at the sum total of all the places I've been and the people I've met and the things I've seen, and even, just sitting here with you doing this podcast and stuff like that, this probably wouldn't be happening if I had not left home. And Jesus doesn't, in his mercy or whatever, he doesn't tell us even 10% of what's awaiting us.
Yeah.
Right? We just have to do it and find out.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I can't wait to just clip that little piece into a short, because I know that there's people that would benefit.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, but it's just whatever you want to say, like the volume's a bit higher, the color's a bit brighter, that just the everyday experience is just, it feels, richer, deeper.
It's kind of like what Jesus talked about. Like, you would have life and life abundantly.
It's exactly like that. And it's very hard to sort of say abstractly what that means. But all of us, I think, had a little taste of that, what I mean, where and it's fleeting often, what I mean, but it happens in these moments. And a lot of times in my time, it's moments where I have not sought the abundant life. I have sought to follow him, and the abundant life has kind of popped up and appeared.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's kind of like I've found that I've stepped into the abundant life without seeking the abundant life.
Exactly. Well, I think that's the whole idea about you have to take up your cross, but my burden's light. It's like this weird thing.
The Christian life is full of paradoxes that don't really make sense abstractly, rationally.
And then you experience it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is true.
I think this is what Jesus was talking about. Like you have these moments.
I think the Spirit reminds you of those scriptures.
Yeah. Where have you sensed this? I mean, it sounds like somewhere along the way, it's kind of
all over.
Up.
But I mean, probably super clear was during COVID and people talking about all sorts of things. And that was the year that I left my old teaching job. 2020 was like 2020 vision on why God called me here. It's for God. This year is totally devoted to God.
And them.
And so it was interesting because then I had the opportunity, hey, you should leave. Go back to the States. All your other friends are going. Like everyone's going. Everyone's leaving the country. Do you want to book a ticket today, next week? And it's like, I devoted this year to God.
Yeah, and
Cambodia.
And fear would have sent you, right?
Totally. And it was interesting because the few who stayed, I remember a conversation specifically with someone who was like, hi, am I doing the right thing? We were just talking and we were like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, and it's so funny because looking back, it was like nothing.
Yeah.
It wasn't nothing, but I feel like it relatively to like a political war, relatively speaking, it wasn't. And oddly enough, we had more freedom in Cambodia than we would have had in our home countries. All my friends went to their home countries to get locked up.
Yeah.
More so. And so, that was just a little piece. But I think bigger than that was chatting with some friends of friends, mentioning how they're working at top tech companies, making hundreds of thousands a year. So I was leaving that environment and I still have friends that are like, wow, that was stupid, or why would you do that? But I just felt like, especially after COVID, when I hear my friends and they were miserable.
Yeah.
And just realizing, I was like, thank you, Lord, because I don't know how you did it, but I feel like you have just spared me from all the misery that comes with pursuing my own dreams.
Yeah. And then you start to be able to see their reality from outside and you go, man, that looks like bondage, right? Or it looks like slavery. Yeah.
And you never see that when you're in it.
Yeah, like I sort of think we've never owned a home, and sort of look at the number of headaches that people have that come with home ownership. And then some of them like have a cottage too. They have a second home that they have to worry about, or a third home or something like that. Thinking, whoa, what's that? I mean, like that sounds terrible. Maybe I wouldn't feel that way if I had it, but you're in the soup, I guess, right? But
yeah, well, and I think that the biggest thing is, like you said, with the volumes turned up on that a little bit clearer, and the lights have just beautiful colors. I just do feel like it's more of a day-to-day thing. And that's like, I feel like the walk with Christ. It's just like every day there's just these interactions that happen. And sure, I sensed it back in America as well. But I just feel like there's so many more opportunities, at least for where God's called me, that when I'm in that, it's just things are clicking and you're just like overflowing with like, God, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a trap to sort of think that just by changing your situation, you're going to change yourself. I heard somebody talk about this once, that going to church is like going to a hospital. Just by physically moving yourself into the hospital doesn't make you well. Yeah. But it does put you in a place where it could happen. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that I can still be a completely selfish, horrible person moving overseas, being a missionary. And we see plenty of evidence of that and it doesn't usually happen overnight. There's a lot of people I think who become embittered over time, and they drift, and that's a real issue. But at the same time, just by physically moving myself here, it does open up whole new windows and possibilities, and for myself to change, and just that I don't think would happen another way.
Yeah, and a step of faith leads to another step of faith. So I think the longer you hold back from that step of faith, the more you're just held back from the whole bit.
Yeah. It's like, you just sometimes you just got to leave the house, right?
Frodo Baggins.
There's only certain things that are going to happen in there. There's only certain people you're going to meet inside there. Yeah.
So missionary drift and burnout, I'm curious, I think you have enough of a picture that maybe you could see some patterns. Drift and burnout are two very different things.
Yeah. When I did a discipleship training school with YWAM back before, I think I spent about 5 years trying to make sure I wasn't called into missions. That's a whole other story, but I was not successful in that apparently.
Thank God.
One of the things that they stressed a lot in the discipleship training school was that the reason most missionaries leave the field, get burned out or whatever, is not actually the work, it's relationships with other missionaries. And so, they used a couple examples where, like, one of the famous ones, and I don't think it's apocryphal, but where one family left the field over peanut butter. Well, it wasn't actually peanut butter, but it was like the group that they were with had these very strong opinions about being incarnational, right? Oh. And so the locals weren't eating peanut butter, so therefore they weren't going to eat peanut butter. And this family said, you know what, gosh, can we just have peanut butter? And that became a big issue. And so on the surface, the flashpoint is peanut butter, but it isn't really, right? It really isn't, that's just the battleground. So I think, the relationships, when they get disappointed, when they get frustrated, when what they thought they signed up for, they feel like they've been betrayed by people. It's the same reason a lot of people leave the church, right? It's relationships. So that's true anywhere. But I do think that the way that missionaries are expected, can live is weird sometimes. That we would look at people working in very isolated situations without a lot of support or community or oversight. And you sort of think, well, that actually wouldn't be good for anybody anywhere. And yet that's kind of the situation a lot of people find themselves in. So it shouldn't surprise us, I think, that people drift and they burn out, or whatever you want to say, they lose the plot in those situations, because I think they're fundamentally probably not that healthy. Sometimes necessary, and we should maybe be surprised more people don't. But I don't know. I think it's really good to be part of, like, as I've said, the school. I think it's really healthy that we're part of an organization, which is something outside of the school, part of a church. None of those things is a cure-all. But I think they They do give us a little bit of balance, a little bit of accountability.
Yeah.
Somebody knows if we're not doing well, if we're not showing up, somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to know.
And it's good that you have so many different circles, because I've also seen that is they have like one circle that's their mission work, their job.
They got all their eggs in one basket, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
and that's probably not healthy.
Even in our home countries, right?
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a whole debate about should the school provide. There's always a pressure in the school that we need to do more for our staff and do this. But I've had a couple people in the school who said, yeah, you know what? I don't think so. I don't think the school should try to do everything.
Yeah.
People need to find a community outside of that.
Maybe that's actually really, really good. It's interesting and maybe that should be the accountability follow up with school. What's your community outside of school, rather than
there's an expectation that our staff are involved in a church and stuff, but like that's hard to enforce.
Right. Yeah. You can't enforce. It's more of through relationship, the checking in. Are you doing okay? Oh, you're not. Do you have other support networks? Yeah. I know what you mean.
And also, if you're really struggling, do you want to talk to the person that's employing you? I mean, it's like,
I know what you mean.
So that's a tricky thing too.
Yeah. Oh, and even with the mission orgs, if your mission org is your everything. So that was one of the advantages when I came over, because I was volunteering with a mission org, working at a secular school, and while having accountability abroad, back home. And even right now, my accountability partners and many of my mentors are away, they're just external from my circumstances. So they can point out those things to me that I wouldn't notice.
Yes. Yeah. But I don't know about you, but there was a time when accountability circles became really fashionable, I guess, or within the church. It was kind of the Promise Keepers movement. And so like every guy I knew was doing these kind of prayer breakfasts with the guys. And I don't want to sort of cast aspersion on any of those things, because I think a lot of them are really healthy and good things, and better to have them doing that than not doing that. But at the end of the day, these were guys sometimes that you saw once a week. It was entirely reliant on self-reporting.
Right.
How are you doing?
Right.
So as I've said, if I'm not doing well at the school, I really can't hide it from everybody all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean.
So that is what I mean. You almost need a community that you don't entirely choose yourself, or one that's
good.
Where people can see you.
No,
whether
that's
it's
really
neighbors or whether it's workmates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was actually one of the big things that I had signed on for Hope for that whole next year, because I was only going to be that short term, a few months, but because I knew, I was like, hey, I think there's people here that I could really grow from and learn from, and it would be really good for me to be in this community. And plus it's godly work and stuff. And even right now, just as I'm outside of that, then I become reliant on the missionaries who've been here 15, 20 years. Yeah. I mean, my time with them is like gold, because I just feel like they have just such precise insight. They can predict things. They just see it coming. It's just so nice, because I think that you just can't see it.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes it's a little frustrating, because it does feel like there's, I don't want to say all churches and stuff, but there's occasionally these movements where we need to sort of do all missions should be short term. If it's going to take longer than 3 years, it's not going to do it. And it's like, that's a lovely idea on paper, but we've been very grateful for people who have been around for longer than 3 years. There's certain things that you can't replace. So or to be in a place like Cambodia, what do you really know after 3 years?
Oh, I know. Yeah, no way. No way. Yeah. Are you kidding
me? You spend that long learning the language and then go home?
I know. Well, and that was kind of one of the reasons why I also wanted to do the podcast, is trying to capture this wisdom for all these new recruits that are coming in.
That's an admirable project, my friend.
Let's see how it goes. Yeah. Well, the best part is it's not my wisdom. It's all these, I just get to go find the gold.
Yeah, so you're gonna be the smartest guy here.
Whoever follows the podcast, whether or not we're gonna remember it,
but you get to hear all of them. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I feel so lucky that I get to. This is great. This is one of my favorite things.
I get it now. I see what this is about.
This is great. This is great. All of these podcasts are things that I wish I would have had. Yeah. Because when I first was searching for Cambodia, I did a Google search and a YouTube search, and I didn't find anything.
There wasn't much out there.
No, not at all. That was crazy. And yet there's these secular people who were like traveling and vlogging. And I was like, if they can do it, if God's calling me, surely God's going to.
It's funny that we think sometimes, this is kind of relates to a class I teach at Hope, but like, what do we really know, or what can we really know? But how sometimes especially with such limited information and from such, if you look up Cambodia, you're going to get Wikipedia and a few other things like that. But sort of to think that actually you might at the end of the day know less. Right. Or,
that's true.
Or you might know some things that are completely unhelpful or irrelevant. Because I've done the same thing. I've looked sometimes just for basic stuff, maps or whatever like that. And sometimes I find like the last post or like, can I take this bus line? And I find the last post was 2018. I'm like, that's a lifetime in Cambodia.
Totally.
So yeah, I get that. Like not just a dearth of content, but if it's like 10 years old, it's useless. Right?
Yeah, that's what's interesting is because of all that information is constantly updating, right? But kind of this long-term wisdom, the 15 to 20-year-old, like what helps you survive long-term in Cambodia? What helps you to, I don't know, embrace the culture? These things, this is what you can't find online. This is what's not that cheap information. It's like, it's lodged away in all these people's experiences.
Yeah, I think what keeps us here, I'd like to say, it's just, it's a daily quiet time with God where he keeps reassuring us of his call. No, it isn't that. There is some of that. But the memory of the call is one thing, that we had some significant events here. But there's a lot of other things too, where we realize if we were to just kind of pull up stakes, it would have a big impact immediately on the particular students I happen to be teaching. But it would also have a big impact on our daughter. It would have an impact on our team. And so you got these roots, and like the longer you've been around, there's going to be more of an impact. Not to say that we're not replaceable, because that can become a trap too. All of us are replaceable in a way.
Yeah.
Or like there's nothing that I'm doing that is impossible for God to do without me.
Right. In that sense. But there's a reason that he's called you and has you here and wants to use you.
And we're kind of, to be perfectly honest, I'm just very pragmatic about it because we felt pretty clear that he was sending us, not Southeast Asia, I think was kind of my idea, but of course everything's his idea anyway. But I think into our organization, that was relatively clear to us. There was within the span of a month, 4 very specific situations where he kept putting the same organization in our path. But once we applied, once we got accepted, I had literally 2 months between when I finished teaching there and when the school started here, probably less than that. So we had 2 months to raise all of our support. And like the conventional wisdom would be, it's not going to happen. Maybe, right. So at some point I said to God, I said, okay, so we're going to do what we think you're calling us to do, but you're really going to help us with the details. So it was a little bit of a bargain. And so I think, unfortunately or unfortunately, I think I'm still under those oral contract. Yep. So he keeps coming through he keeps supplying for our needs. He keeps giving us what we need and stuff. So to me, that tells me something. It doesn't tell me everything, because I think it's possible to manipulate people into the fact that we just kind of get up in the morning and go do what we're going to do. And God gives us what we need to do that, the help that we need, the resources that we need. That tells me something.
Totally. As we conclude, do you have any, stories that you've just really clearly seen God's providence, God's working?
Oh, lots of them. There's big ones and there's small ones. We've had lots of situations where we've been in a jam and there didn't seem to be a way out, but where he got us out of it. The work that we're involved with has to do at the end of the day with Bible translation and this idea that God gave, the different languages of the world seems to be God's idea as a result of, if you want to go back to Babel or whatever, but the idea that God honors language, he uses language to communicate people. What we read in English is a translation. It's not the original language, right? So somebody did the hard work for us to get there. But just to see what happens to people when the word goes forth. There's a promise that just as the rain comes down and produces fruit, I should have this memorized, but so it is with my word, that it will not fail to produce fruit. And so that's the promise that we hold on to, that when the word goes out, something's going to happen. We don't know how much fruit, we don't know when, but there will be fruit. So we've been able to see that again and again. So just one example of something that was really out of the blue is that one of our team was working in a very difficult situation, with a closed people group, one that people would see as relatively hostile to the gospel, but a rather large group. And in order to work at all in this community, you have to really develop relationships. And so they developed a relationship with the leader of the religious leader of the whole community, worked on the translation. And at the end of it, we had a Bible dedication, which is something that we do. We sort of, usually it's a big event. Usually it's kind of a community-wide event where we invite people from all over, and VIPs are there and that kind of stuff, just to kind of honor the people who were working on it, but also spotlight to the community that something momentous is happening here.
Yeah.
This one, we couldn't do that. This one was during COVID, but also it was kind of on the down low. Just a few people were there. But a lot of work was done to typeset and to give the scripture, to basically make it look as good as possible. And so when the copy of the New Testament was handed to, again, and this man is not a Christian, was handed to the leader of the religious community, he was able to feel so invested in this because he had been consulted along the way about a lot of things. He's able to feel so invested in it and excited about it that he actually ordered a copy for every single place of worship in the whole country, which we're in a situation where it's like, wait a second, these are places of worship where Christians would not maybe even be welcome to set foot.
But God has put his word.
But God has put his word into, and by this sort of request or the order of this religious community, the whole community. So you labor, this is difficult work and discouraging work. And they had a lot of fallouts. They had one of the members of the translation team got into an accident that he was a real risk that he was never going to walk again. Dengue fever 4 times, one more time. And so labor, pursuit, and just see very little fruit for years and years and years. And then at the end, it's like God kicked open the floodgates, right? Wide open. So you just never know when those are coming. But to say that I kind of did that thing when I heard it, it's like, wait, what?
Right. Is that really?
Like, really? It's like, I didn't even have the faith to pray for that.
Right.
Maybe somebody did. I don't know. But because to me, that was a bridge too far. That was unthinkable.
Right.
You hope a couple people are going to read it. You hope eventually there will be a little bit of change, something like that, but not like this.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that. And I don't know about you, but the more I'm out here in Cambodia, the more I've been exposed to a lot more spiritual things that we're usually kind of shielded from in the West. And I'd say definitely in the biggest way in my life, I've seen that prayer is like significantly more effective on that spiritual front. And it's so weird.
My wife has said the same thing. She said she goes and it's almost a regional or territorial thing. She'll go into certain areas and she finds that these ideas she has in her, they just change. Like she thinks that God's going to do this. Right. And just by stepping into this place. So she's had that experience because she travels around to different provinces, different people groups, and just saying her faith is affected, her prayer is affected.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's
so
really
you've had
weird.
that same experience.
Oh, yes. And that's the crazy thing.
What do you think's going on
so,
there?
Well, I can't wait because I want to interview a few more people who can talk specifically on the spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
And this has kind of been my deep dive, as an educational guy. I'm like, I don't understand this. I want to learn more. And as a physics guy, I understand the rules of the physical universe.
Yeah.
To the limited extent that a mere mortal can, right? But then as I'm starting to see some of these spiritual things, I'm like, something is going on here that I clearly have no idea about and I've never been educated about.
I might have a book for you.
Good. I'll tell you some of the ones that I've been reading too. But what has happened is as I've started praying a lot more on these things, one easy example is someone who praying for and at least really trying to do best in my effort to evangelize this person for years. And then kind of at some point just feel like the ground is too hard. Like I need to be putting my efforts elsewhere. But I pray for that. And it's in your hands, Lord. And then like kind of wild out of nowhere, that person reaching out to me to go to church, lead me to Christ. I want to know more about you. Yeah. That's something that I clearly didn't do anything about.
Yeah.
So like, I think that there's definitely some spiritual stuff going on. As I pray against it, it's weird how quickly it dismisses. And I think it's kind of like that fear where it's, or a doubt where it's just like, call it, name it. And I'm praying, Lord, for your presence in that area. And it's so strange because it's something I don't understand.
We have heard that story a lot of times where people have not, whether gone into missions or left for a long time because they said, well, I really need to reach name a family member or something like that, or a neighbor or something like that, or I need to, they need to be here. And they finally have sort of decided, what, I think I'm just going to go. Found that somehow just the act of them leaving, sometimes it was, who knows what it was, right? But the removal of themselves or them seeing, wow, they're really serious and willing to go there.
An act of faith.
Has actually done the thing in that relationship that that never happened when they stayed. So that's another thing I think that holds people back. Sometimes it's the fear of what will happen or what will and I had that too when we were in the Chicago suburbs when I was in graduate school and I knew I had been in Asia long enough. I was taking, I knew sort of what we were giving up. I knew like beautiful libraries and children's museums and parks and all this kind of stuff. And I knew that we were going, had none of those things. And so I remember thinking, having a couple of weeks where I was going, what am I doing? Am I going to damage my kid culturally or educationally forever? And then I just had this moment. It's kind of like, that's the fog, I think, sometimes. Of the weird loops that you get into, or maybe Satan does that. I don't know. He just kind of makes it all. And then I started to think, well, wait a second, what am I thinking about here? So I want him to stay here and maybe read a book about Cambodia or visit a sterile museum exhibit about Cambodia, as opposed to like being there and seeing the real thing. That's kind of a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And just seeing that's been confirmed to his experience has been richer and deeper in so many fronts. Yeah. And he was able to do and see things that he never would have.
Totally.
We certainly would have never had the money to take him the places we've been and do the things he's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he did it just by tagging along with us for this crazy thing we're doing.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, before we conclude, I guess, Lud, do you want to name some of those books that are worth reading?
The thing that I've wanted, just my theory, we're just working on theories here, right? We're all somewhere under heaven. There's these references keep popping up as you read through the Old Testament and sometimes even the New Testament, where you have these things that are not angels exactly, but they're not gods either, but things like spirit prince in the book of Daniel or whatever, like Persia of Greece. And it sounds to me, when we think of Persia and Greece, we think of physical territories, but I think nations in the Bible means people groups, right? So I think maybe what we're encountering is this middle kingdom, that there is, I'm not talking about gods on the level of Lord of heaven and earth,
right.
But we're encountering some different spiritual dynamic.
Yeah.
And this is something that it's not just pure speculation. Our neighbor, or a guy on our team, as he was language learning and he was having conversations with people, he met a guy who was actually in charge of the spirits of the market.
Interesting.
So it was the central market. And so this guy's job was to be sort of a medium for the spirits of the market. And he made a comment that before there was a lot of conflict, but then he had decided to bring all the spirits under one chief spirit. And that since that time, things had worked a lot better. And I was sort of, wow, so this is like a job, right? This is something that you can do.
That's what's crazy, right? Because none of us would comprehend that, right?
No, I didn't even know that was a thing.
And Lekana honestly tells me that there's, in the political sphere, many of the higher ranked people, they have people like that worshiping deities full time to help protect them or do other things for them. There's some really weird stuff. And I'm actually wondering if some of that crap is going down with political leaders in the States too that you don't hear about. So it's like, this is insane, some of the things you're hearing about.
Yeah, you hear a lot of stuff, right? And if not all of it is truth, maybe some of it is.
Well, there
could be something to it.
And regardless of whether it's intentional or not, there's definitely spiritual evil. And it's just that in itself works all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And so that's just something. It's just so strange to see it. From a Western perspective, it's strange to come to a culture where that's recognized as valid as physical.
Yeah, and I don't, as far as the existence of these things, agnostic is not the right word. I don't disbelieve it, and I don't sort of think necessarily it's always everywhere all the time.
Exactly, because I think those are the extremes, right?
But if you just look at scripture, it's just very matter of fact. Jesus, who I think probably knows more than I do about this stuff, Jesus is very matter of fact about it. He mentions demons, but for some people, he's frustratingly vague on it, right? He just kind of says it and just moves on. And so he acknowledges it like it's a real thing. So I tend to try to believe Jesus about things. Like, oh, well, he thinks they're real, right? So they probably are.
Yeah.
But all I've got to go on, that's the most concrete source that I have.
Yeah, no, that's good.
It's a thing, right? And so the rest of it, we just have to try to work out, what do we do about that now, right?
Yeah.
What's happening here?
And sometimes it comes back to the same essentials of like trust in God, faith. I mean, I think about the whole, Caleb and Joshua thing, where it's just, this looks like impossible. But Caleb and Joshua have the faith that, no, God called us to that. Let's go for it. Yeah,
but that faith is, and that's something that's important too, that faith is not, I really don't like the term blind faith. I think it's the opposite of blind faith because they had been through the wilderness. They had seen God get them out of Egypt.
Exactly.
They knew the power that God had. And so the faith that God was with them and could do this is a very reasonable faith.
That is a great point.
Yeah. So I like to think that, just the problem is forgetting. Forgetting leads to, and it's easy to forget what God has done and easy to forget that he's keeping us here and easy to forget the call. So the work that we have, just like with the Israelites, right? Nothing's different, is just remember. You do these things, you celebrate this thing, you eat this lamb, so you will remember, because if you don't do these things, you'll forget. And then forgetting leads to disaster.
That's really good.
Yeah. So you just remembering is work.
Yeah.
So we keep telling our stories. We keep telling the stories of the school if we can, the stories of what God has done. And if this is nothing else than capturing stories, what a worthwhile project.
Well, and the testimonies, man, people have some incredible testimonies, and it's just so encouraging.
And sometimes these people for a long time and you're like, why don't we know these things, right?
Yeah. That's why I kind of wish that we had a little bit more of that, opportunity to hear what is God doing here? What is God doing here? Oh, this is amazing.
Yes.
This is amazing.
Why? Every Sunday I think that, why don't we do more testimonies?
Yeah.
Like every devotion, every opportunity we have to come together, it's like, I don't want to say we're wasting it, but it feels like sometimes that a testimony would be more useful than some of the other things we fill it with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Khmer, oral storytelling, like stories, is one of the biggest ways you communicate moral. And I think that's like God gives that to us in our lives all the time.
Do you find that do you feel like in Khmer Christian circles or Khmer churches, there's a higher emphasis on testimony? Do you feel like that they do a better job than we do?
I think certainly there's more of an emphasis on I think so, yes. I mean, I've seen, especially in the small house churches, there's definitely a bigger, it's really cool actually, because you see people constantly seeing God in their lives.
Yeah.
And it's so encouraging. Yeah.
The thing is, if we're to believe the reports that have come out recently, Cambodia has one of the fastest growing churches in the world, right?
Yeah, I haven't heard that report, but that's cool.
I mean, I think when the 100 Years of the Gospel, Christianity Today, they were talking about either in Asia or the region, I don't remember which. And so we ought to be a little more curious about what the Khmer church is doing.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Totally.
It feels like we might have a few things to learn.
Yeah, well, and I think the biggest thing I'm seeing right now is the community aspect.
Yeah.
Just like the idea of we're family, we're a community, and we know each other.
100%. Because if you, just in my limited experience with hearing the stories of our Cambodian staff, how did you come to Jesus or how did you come to faith? A lot of them grew up in the province and they came to Phnom Penh alone to go to university. And it was the church that took them in and fed them and housed them and became like a family. And remained as a family when they became believers, and sometimes were isolated from their own families or cast out of their own families.
Yeah.
The church really operated as a family. And I'm thinking, that sounds pretty first century, pretty New Testament.
Yeah, totally.
It?
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but way more common than I've heard in my Western friends. Many of my Khmer believing friends have testimonies of this situation was going on. My relative, whatever, deathly sick. We went to every other person. We went to the witch doctor.
Yes.
And yet when we prayed in the name of Jesus, it went.
Yeah.
I don't hear many Westerners with that testimony.
And I've heard that story too, that it's the obstacle here is not that there is a God.
Yeah,
That's not an obstacle. In fact, when my wife went to the Khmer Rouge trials, and one of the things people had to share, they had to share their names before they testified, or there's the people involved in the trial. They had to share where they were from and education. They also had to share the religion. And a lot of the justices were from, somewhere in Europe or whatever, and they said they were atheist or agnostic, and people are like, but that's not a thing. Who's your God?
It does seem really stupid when you actually acknowledge the spiritual reality right? Like you don't believe in physics?
Yeah. Well, it's like, the Roman, I was telling this to my students today, the Romans thought the Christians were atheists because they had no visible gods. It's like, nobody doesn't have a God. Why are you holding out on us? Where's your God? So, but I think what I've learned from people that are working in some of the village situations here is not that people think your God is not real or something like that. They think he's just not relevant here.
Or that's your God. That's your God.
Okay. But we're here, we're in this, we're dealing with what's locally available, who has local power. It's when they see that, oh, wait a second, that God can do stuff here and do stuff that we haven't seen done before. Now they're interested.
And isn't that like Jesus' ministry?
Yeah.
So that's what I am and I love, again, this is the step of faith that leads to another step of faith. And so that's kind of where I am in the journey, is trying to understand, like, I think God's calling us kind of this day-to-day thing that I read about in the Bible here in Cambodia, and it's happening. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And we don't know what we have with the Bible and with the Lord and stuff like that. We walk around with this every day and just and
absolutely
don't realize the kind of power we're playing with. Yeah.
I totally agree. Well, hey, thank you so much. It's been awesome. This is really fun. So I guess any final words for the audience before we turn things off?
I've had plenty of words, haven't I? I would, I think we referred to this maybe earlier on before we even started. I think God is a redemptive God. And sometimes we think, I don't know, about a lot of things, about career, about marriage, about missions, whatever, that there's basically one track and we either stay on it or we fall off of it and disaster results. That isn't kind of what I see as a character of God. I think that we're getting decisions wrong all the time. And the question is whether if we get off the track he has us on or wants for us, is he going to join us there? And so, the idea is that I do believe the decision of where to go and who to marry and what to do is really important. And there will be a cost either way, there will be consequences. But the most important thing is that when we take that step, we invite God into that. He can redeem any situation. It's been a weight off to realize that for me to come here and maybe I picked the wrong school, or maybe I'm not still supposed to be here, or maybe I got it wrong somewhere, but at the same time that God can still make something out of the situation I'm in. It's just to realize that he is committed to his name. He is committed to his work. He's committed far more than I will ever be. And so there's only so much I'm going to be able to improve or take away from what he intends to do. And that if you can sort of come under his banner, come under his name, there is safety in that. And it's a little bit like if you have an employee and the employee messes up or screws up, the owner will sometimes cover it over for the sake of the relationship with the customer. And I feel like God's doing that all the time with us, right? For the sake of his name. So if you even if you have a crazy idea about missions or whatever, that once you sort of run up his flag and once you sort of say I'm with him, he's got a stake in it now, and he is going to see it through in some ways with or without us. But so that I feel like, he is, I don't know how I made it this far. I don't know how we've been here this long, but it's got to be him. He is the sustainer. He's not just the one who calls. He also he's got more invested in us being here than we do. And he's got more invested. He loves the school more than we love the school. He loves the families more than we love the families. He loves the students far more than we ever will. And for the sake of his name, for the sake of his gospel, he's going to sort of try to keep us afloat.
I love it. I love it. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
you or someone you know is interested in teaching in Cambodia, then send them the link to Hope International School below. You can also send them the link to opportunities.omf.org if they're just interested in general in teaching abroad. As always, I hope this episode inspires you to follow God's calling wherever and whatever that may be. Peace.